Greetings and welcome to INTL 644, Cyber and the Intelligence Cycle. My name is Larry Dietz and it'll be my pleasure to be your instructor for the next 8 weeks for this new and what we hope will be an innovative course. The purpose of this week's lesson, Setting the Stage, is to provide the perspective on where the course is going and to stimulate your thinking on how you can approach the course with your own unique perspective and experience, and how you can apply the intelligence cycle perhaps in your daily work, whatever it is you're doing. We will look at the intelligence cycle in a traditional setting, and we will look at it from the perspective of the cyber world. There are 6 objectives for the course, 4 of which will be addressed in this week's lesson, and you see them on this slide. In particular, we will continually counterbalance the use of the intelligence cycle in pursuit of cyber targets, and we will explore how the commercial sector is able to employ the intelligence cycle on the cyber side as well as in other areas. The course has 2 perspectives, and that is looking at the intelligence cycle in cyberspace operations and how cyber tools can be used to optimize the intelligence cycle. Of course, it's appropriate to start with a fundamental understanding of the intelligence cycle. The nature of today's world has put law enforcement and Defense Department together in ways that would have never been thought of 20 years ago. In particular, law enforcement and DoD are both involved when there's a terrorist incident and in the ongoing efforts to minimize the impact of terrorist incidents here in the United States and abroad. On the left, you see the FBI's version of the intelligence cycle. On the right is the intelligence process as it appears in the joint publication JP 2-0. I often use joint publications not only because their copyright is free, in other words, it's public domain, but because joint doctrine has to be followed by all the services, since many, if not most of my students are interested in defense intelligence agencies as a career. The fact that they will be familiar with joint publications has been an asset, I've been told. The FBI regards the process as a collaborative one. The Defense Department regards the intelligence cycle as mission-centric. Different commercial entities have their own takes on the intelligence cycle. For you Clausewitzians out there, the cyvalence intelligence cycle shows the means in the middle and the process, if you will, the ways as a circle of activities around those 3 means. The well-known large consulting firm of KPMG puts the two inputs on the outside of their diagram, that's numbers 1 and 3 in my chart here, and divides the intelligence cycle essentially into 4 pieces: set, gather, analyze, and act. For those of you that have taken tactical intelligence, one could think of this as a variation of the OODA loop: orient, observe, decide, and act. The OODA loop, generally conceded as being better for tactical environments, originally developed for, I believe, F-86 pilots in the Korean conflict as they were deciding what to do in dogfights against Russian MiG aircraft. For the sake of the course, I have taken the diagram here as a simplified intelligence cycle. It is mission focused. It only has a few components, and the requirements up in the upper left are the starting point, and the requirements are where the commander provides his or her input in the form of command guidance and the concept of the operation at hand, the CONOP. In the course of the course, we will use this diagram as a basic and simple form of the intelligence cycle. Now that we've got an intelligence cycle that we can agree on, we will turn our attention to the cyberspace domain. The cyberspace domain, as you're all well aware, is critical to almost every nation and almost every non-state actor. The critical infrastructure, acronym CI, and key resources, KR, are the bedrock of the nation. The critical infrastructure consists of 16 subsectors, and those subsectors have a federal agency called the Sector-Specific Agency that is the coordinator, if you will, for the defense efforts for that sector. The Defense Department is responsible only for one. Department of Homeland Security has the responsibility for 8 and is co-responsible for the transportation sector with the Department of Transportation. Other departments that are sector-specific agencies would include Treasury, Health and Health Services, Energy, and Agriculture. In looking at the missions of cyberspace operations, because the missions generate the commander's requirements, which triggers the use in the intelligence cycle, I have bolded the main missions in this slide. To retain freedom of maneuver in cyberspace for friendly forces, I should add, accomplish the Joint Force Commander's objectives, deny freedom of action to adversaries, and enable other operational activities. These are the operations that would be applied in the 3 layers of cyberspace. The 3 layers of cyberspace are shown here. The physical layer refers to buildings, data centers, computers, servers, cables, wires, antennas. And those physical assets can be targeted against and collected with many of the traditional means we talk about: UMINT, SIGINT, COMINT, etc. The logical layer refers to the bits and bytes, as well as the networks. And perhaps the most vulnerable of all is the cyber persona layer, meaning the people that are involved with the cyber network systems, software, services, etc. Social engineering, human intelligence, human if you will, is very effectively employed against the cyber persona layer. And so, again, I emphasize the fact that you need to understand that there's really no demarcation line that traditional intelligence methodologies, TTP, tactics, techniques, procedures, as well as new things such as vulnerability assessment that we'll talk about later on, and zero-day exploitation used against the logical layer, can be the traditional ones can be used on the cyber side, and analogously perhaps some of the cyber techniques can be used on the more traditional sea, land, air domain. For example, the man-in-the-middle technique as an alternative deception effort is done in both worlds, physical over the radio and on the internet. When you look at the actions taken as a part of cyberspace relations, you need to consider these I have up here, as well as one I don't have, which is exploit. We will talk about how nation states, China in particular, use cyber exploitation as a means of advancing their national defense and their economic welfare by burrowing electronically into targeted systems of other nations with malicious malware, and by having that malware search out sensitive data that would give the attacker an advantage and provide that data back to the attacker. This exploitation form of attack is very effective, particularly since the victim is very late in discovering it. The cyberspace operational preparation of the battlefield requires new techniques as a part of the intelligence cycle, such as mapping the technical landscape to include the types of hardware and software and their versions and their patch status, because those characteristics can determine which attacks would be successful against those targets. The joint publication 312 is the latest in happening cyberspace operations for DoD. The goal of intelligence operations at all levels is to support the military commander. At the highest level, the 4-star Cybercom, Cyberspace Command, which is headed by the director of NSA, Admiral Rogers, here in October of 2016, is responsible for not only the national intelligence, NSA, but for command and control over the 4 service cyberspace components: Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marine. It's interesting to point out that there is such a thing as the strategic corporal here, meaning the action of a lower level person could have a high level impact. Any individual that understands how to get attacks and defenses and viruses and malware off the internet is potentially someone that can impact the cyber domain. in looking at sources for the intelligence cycle within the cyber domain, open source research is particularly important. One of them that we'll discuss in some detail later on is social media intelligence, SOCMINT, where you mine Facebook and LinkedIn and Pinterest and Twitter for intelligence purposes. There are a number of specialized data repositories, both virtual and centrally located, that are also useful in this use. The diagram here formed the basis of a presentation I gave at Carnegie Mellon a couple of years ago, 2010, where I provided a high-level perspective on cyber war, including a combination of organization-centric things and tactics. So, from an organization, if we look at reporting and cooperation on the left, you'll notice I looked at the law enforcement and Department of Defense split. And on the right, community interest looked at the government versus the private sector. In the upper right-hand corner, I make note that the legal definition of what is an attack will undoubtedly vary by jurisdiction, so that the Russian definition of what is an attack will probably not be the same as the American or British definition. And even if the definition is established, are there any crimes that are related to that? Such as theft of identity, we talked about PII. In addition, I showed tactics in defense that apply equally to both the commercial sector and the government sector. So this week we've looked at the different perspectives on the intelligence cycle. We've integrated multiple sources, and we've looked at the multidimensional nature of cyberspace operations. You've applied the intelligence cycle to cyberspace operations, and we've looked at the differentiation between the cyber domain from the more traditional space, air, land, and sea domains. And we've looked at the way there are complementary and yet different perspectives from military and commercial sources. For this week's forum, we have two questions. The first of which is concerned with the intelligence cycle, more in an academic vein, as it's treated by Mark Pythian, the author of our textbook. And the second question is more about, should organizations encourage innovation and initiative to come up with better ways to do their job in the cyber domain, or is the practicality for relying on a supported product much more compelling? I provide references in a couple of places for you. I have some references here in the slides. I have other references in the reading and resource portion of the lessons, and the references come in two flavors. One set of references I think is more critical, and if you want the word mandatory, I guess mandatory will have to work, for the lesson of the week. And the other are supplemental, and the supplemental resources will help you round out your knowledge of the subject. So I hope that you'll find this week's lesson interesting and that you enjoy the course.